Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Pedig Beis Halacha Aleph. We're going to be learning Daf Yud Dalid. We left off on Daf Yud Dalid Amid Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amid by the 2 dots at the end of the line, Amid Ablazer. So, firstly, let us review and let us focus on the opening ruling of the Mishnah that certain products that grow only in Eretz Yisrael are chayiv in the Demai separations, even if you purchase them b'chutz la'aretz, outside Eretz Yisrael. And now the Gemara will begin to clarify, hold on, that really depends, perhaps, from whom you purchased it. Now, our Gemara is going to follow the opinion that is really subject to a machlokes tanoim. But we're going to go with the side that ein kinyan l'goy be'eretz Yisrael lahafkia, midei maisres, which means what happens if there's land owned by a guy, produce grows there. Our Gemara follows the opinion that those products, that food has to be tithed, of course, not by the goy. A goy is not chayiv in the mitzvahs, but when a yid buys it from the goy, since they grew in Eretz Yisrael, there is an obligation to separate all of the maisvahs. And now we're going to have a machlokes amoraim, beginning with Rabbi Lazar here, and then Rabbi Yechanan, whether the rule in the Mishnah, buying a product that grew in Eretz Yisrael, because this type only comes from Eretz Yisrael. When you buy it, even b'chutz la'aretz, you chayiv only in Demai, whether it depends whether you bought it from a Jew, whether it depends whether you bought it from a goy, and ultimately, there's going to be an attempt of understanding the machlokes 2 ways. The second way will be refuted, and it's going to boil down, and listen to these words, whether we say that in the times of the Mishnah and in the earlier times of the Amoraim, that Roiv Eretz Yisrael nesuna biyad Yisrael, or Roiv Eretz Yisrael is nesuna biyad Goyim. As we will see, it appears that this is mamish a machlokes in the mitzias of the time. We're going to explain this in the beginning of today's daf, but we will also be learning a lot about the shita, which is normally attributed to Rabbi Meir, called chayshin and lemu'uta. Normally, we follow the majority. Rabbi Meir was chayshin and lemu'uta. Perhaps other Rabbi Lazar, perhaps they followed the shita in Rabbi Meir, that chayshin and lemu'uta. However, we will make a clear distinction between 2 types of miyutas, and even if one subscribes chayshin and lemu'uta, in one case, they won't necessarily follow, or we do not follow chayshin and lemu'uta in the other case. And finally, the din of the Mishnah regarding buying a product. And as we say, when you buy something in Eretz Yisrael, you assume it grew there. If you buy something b'chutz la'aretz, generally, that's what we learned in the previous chapter, you assume it grew near that area. As we learned in the previous chapter, a braisa that already begins to qualify it, we'll leave that in the previous chapter. We will learn today about the unique category of a tagar, of a merchant. That means that if you have a merchant that is known to buy products both locally and in imported products, then if you buy it from the tagar, you may not make such an automatic presumption, which is what we learned in the previous chapter. Where you buy something in a store, you can assume it came from that area. No, when you buy it from a tagar, from a merchant, then yes, you have to take into account the possibility that he bought it from another area, and this is all going to lead back to the dinim of buying a product from a tagar b'chutz la'aretz, even if it's not an item that exclusively grows in Eretz Yisrael. Still, there's going to be a chayshinan that it did come from Eretz Yisrael, and we will see what that all means regarding your obligation of separating either vadai maisres or the mai maisres. Okay. So Chavra Daf Yud Dalid, again, 2 lines from the top of the Amid. The Mishnah opened up by giving the Devela, Tamarim, Charuvim, Oiris, and Kamun, the 5 items. And as the Gemara just finished explaining, that those that have a superior quality to them are known in those times to have been grown in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore the Mishnah says, even though you bought it b'chol makom, we already quoted from the Rambam, b'chol makom doesn't have to mean anywhere in the world mamish, but it means in the aratzos that are near Eretz Yisrael. Let's go with the Rambam. You are obligated, but obligated in what? In separating the mai. But hold on, now let's understand why only the mai. Why not? Why are you not chayiv to separate all of the maises? In other words, whom did you buy it from? Is going to be the first topic of today's daf. Amar Rabbi Lazar, and yes, we have different nuschayos, and we will follow dafke the gears of the Rashirilio. All right, so take a look how we're reading this. Amar the Amoyre Rabbi Lazar loishanu. Our Mishnah that you only have to separate the my separations is Ela Halukeach mi Yisrael. That's the girsa here. In other words, you buy it from a yid, and that's why it's not treated as definitely tevel. The yid is telling you that all of the maisers were removed, but that's the holding of the mai. That there is a certain minimum level of nemanos. Yeah, we believe that Truma Gedolah was separated, but no, we don't believe that everything was separated, and therefore the purchaser, the chaver, as we learned, has to separate the Trumas Maiser and Maiser Sheni, in whichever order, as we just finished learning. Abel, however, says the Amoyde Rabbi Lazar. Now here goes the Girsa min Hagoy. If you buy it from a goy, the goy doesn't have any nemanos. And why would the goy separate it? There's nothing to ask him. You know this type of date came from Eretz Yisrael. Again, true, I will read the Surah in the Rashirilio. Maybe it grew in a field of a goy. Doesn't matter. Our Gemara, both Rabbi Lazar and the next Shita Rabbi Yochanan, here we are following the opinion that even if something was grown on land owned by a goy, in other words, from the beginning, from when it reached the third until the Gemar Malach, doesn't make a difference. That item inherently has to be tithed. And if a yid will end up buying it, the yid is obligated to tithe it. So if you buy it from a goy, vada, you have to have a relationship with this product as you have with any tevel vadai. Even though you bought it outside Eretz Yisrael, because you know that it grows from Eretz Yisrael. This makes a lot of sense, right? However, comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he says, no, lo shanya, makes no difference. He alikeach mi Yisrael, he alikeach min agoy. Even if you buy it from a goy, the rule of the Mishnah always stands. Yeah, you know it comes from Eretz Yisrael, but all you need to do is to separate the demai separations, and that shita will have to be explained. And as we said in the introduction, the Gemara is going to give us now two ways of understanding the machlokes. We will call this explanation number one, explanation number two. We will refute explanation number two, and we'll remain with explanation number one. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Lazar Savar Meimar. Now listen to this. This we will follow the pshat of the Gemara, which will be a little bit difficult. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar lived at the same time. We learned Rabbi Lazar was a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan initially, and it seems like they're having a machlokes mitzvos. Rabbi Lazar holds Roiv Eretz Yisrael Nusuna B'Yad Hagoy. This is for sure only speaking about that era, that the majority of Eretz Yisrael was in the hands of a goy. You are buying a product. We have a rule called Kol the Parish Meruba Parish. Since Rabbi Lazar holds that the majority of the lands of Eretz Yisrael was Nesuna B'Yad Goyim, which means the farmer, the goy, zicher, for sure, did not separate anything. You know it came from Eretz Yisrael. So that's why he says that if you bought it, min hagoy, not that the goy was the farmer, doesn't make a difference. The goy who sold it to you, right, we're not going to believe him from whom he bought it. We have to halachically make an assumption. Right, from a goy. So the farmer was a goy. The person from whom you're buying it is a goy. That's important because even now that we explained that our sugi is following the shita, that ein kinyan legoy be'eretz Yisrael hafkiya midei maises. In other words, it's obligated to be tithed. If the Jew would be the one buying it from the goy farmer, a Jew would not be allowed to sell the product without prior tithing it. But you bought it from a goy. That means not the farmer separated Trumas Umaisis, not the seller is separated Trumas Umaisis. It came into your hands, which is why Rabbi Lazar says that if you buy it miyad goy, vadai. Now, why would Rabbi Yochanan argue with that? Because Rabbi Yochanan Savar Meimar, listen to these words, Roiv Eretz Yisrael Nesuna B'Yad Yisrael. No, the majority of the Jewish land in his days was under the ownership of Yidden, which means following the same rule of Kol B'Padish Meruba Padish, we assume that the produce was grown by a Yid. Yeah, you're buying it from a Goyish merchant. So what? The farmer was a Jew. Now, we don't know whether the farmer was a Chaver or Amaretz. Let's go by that. Called the Padish Meruba Padish. Most were Amaretz. Okay. But we also already said that Amaratzim separate at least the Truma Gedoyla. And on everything else, they roiv of them also separate everything else, which was why ultimately you get to keep the Meiser Isha and why you get to keep the Meiser Ani, right? In other words, bottom line is that the machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan is because since we don't know who the farmer is, yes, we're going to go after the concept of roiv. The machlokes is what was the roiv at that time. Now, it's a little bit difficult, but it's not so difficult. Okay, difficult meaning because normally we don't want to make a machlokes and mitzias, but when it comes to an era, and especially with the type of technology that they had then, unlike today you can mamish find out every piece of land, who owns it. At least you can make in such an attempt. Some people know how to cover it. It makes sense that people won't know when you take the totality of Eretz Yisrael to establish what the roiv is. It's it was probably close to half and half, and it can go either way. Okay. Now, the Gemara is giving another attempted explanation. And I would argue the reason why we're not happy with the first is because it's not glottic. We try to avoid having a machlokes dependent on a machlokes and mitzias, even though this mitzias is hard to know. So here the Gemara says, and we're gonna backtrack this, but right now, and even if we're gonna try to make even better, that they both agree. Now they both agree to what side? To Rabbi Yechanan's side. We're trying to make it that Roiv Eretz Yisrael Nesuna B'Yad Yisrael, and if that would be the case, then we'll call the Purish Manu, call the Parish Manu Parish. Why would Rabbi Lazar say that if you're Keach V'Nagoy Kama, you have to separate Vadai and not Demai? Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Perhaps Rabbi Lazar Chash L'Meutam. So does one have to take the minority possibility into account? So guys, we all know that generally there is such a view. This view is attributed in the times of the Tanoim to Rabbi Meir. And the Gemara is saying that maybe Rabbi Lazar sides with Rabbi Meir that Chayshin and Lemeuta. Let me add another important detail that when it comes to the Gemara is going to speak about, the Gemara is going to infer a much greater distinction between two types of meutas. But before we get into what the Gemara is going to imply in a moment, I do want to say that if we're going to use percentages as to identify a majority minority, there's no doubt that in halacha there are different types of meutas, right? We have a miut hamatzui and we have a miut she'eno matzui. Let's use percentages. You have something that is, one out of 100, and you have something that's 10 out of 100. You have something that's 40 out of 100. And absolutely, it makes a difference. And if we're just going to come with that knowledge, which is a fact, that it's a percentage thing, the fact that in the first explanation, which actually will be the maskana, we're learning today this gewaldige thing, a machlekes, it's not a logical machlekes, it's a historical machlekes, whether in the end of the era of the Tanoim, in the beginning of the era of the Amoraim, whether Reiv Eretz Yisrael Lusuna B'Yad Goyim, or Reiv Eretz Yisrael Lusuna B'Yad Yisrael, the fact that there is such a machlekes means that it was almost the same. We're speaking about the Edo, who were the majority owners of the farming lands in Israel, Jews or lahavdil non-Jews at that era, at that time. So even if we're going to follow with Rabbi Yechanan, it doesn't mean that the Goyish ownership was little. It was probably, let's say, 45%. That's a real miut. You understand? And therefore, there is a lot of logic to say that over here, Rabbi Lazar will follow the sheet of Rav Meir. I know there's something called roiv, and sometimes roiv means 50% plus a drop. Right? That's 50 plus. But still, such a miut you have to be chayish to, especially here l'chumra, especially when we're speaking about truma gedoyla, that if it wasn't separated, chayv misa b'dei shamayim. This is real macholas asurais. Okay. Now, what's going to be amazing is that We all know that there is Rav Meir that is Chashin Lemeuta. Nevertheless, we're going to have a Braisa. The Gemara is going to attempt to prove from a Braisa that there is a concept called Chashin Lemeuta. Now, this Braisa is not attributed to Rav Meir. So this would be an approach to show that there are more on the team of Chashin Lemeuta, and then the Gemara is going to reject the possibility of Chashin Lemeuta, but it won't create a problem on Rav Meir, as we'll explain in a moment. Okay. So, Zok the Gemara, that this approach, Chashin Lemeuta, fits Kahadam, like the Braisa, speaking about the Sirki. Now, the Rashirilio teaches on the left column, Sirki is this Shayeres Yishmaelim. We're speaking about an Arab caravan. That's just the way it worked. People traveling through the desert, and not everyone knows how to do that. And you have to know how to bring food along with you. And not only that, many of them would travel to sell food. So the Braisa is speaking about a known Arab caravan. That what? Shehi mistapekes yom echad min ha'isur. That it normally makes the effort only to be in possession of machalois that are mutares to eat. And nevertheless, they allow themselves, and we know only one day a year. It doesn't have to mean one day a year, but it means that's a very small miyuta. But we know that once in a while, a yom echad, they buy prohibited foods. Now, we're not saying that they're not selling meat as well, but the way the Rashirilio says, we are focusing now on grain. That was one of the items, commodity that people sell. And yes, since they were around Eretz Yisrael and they interacted and did business with Jews, so they were known, fakir, they were known that they normally are careful only to buy food that's already tithe. Not that they do it, they're not mechuyev. They buy it from Eden that tithed it. But once in a while, Yom Echad, we know that they had, in this case, grain that was vaday tevel. Once we know that it's once a year, even if it's only once a year, Paskins the Braisa Nasa Oisa Hayoim Hoicheach L'Chalayomim. That day becomes an indication, it becomes a Hoicheach, that no matter when you buy it, of course, they have no nemanas. We're not talking about Goyim have no nemanas halachically, but we're speaking that the fact that we know that once in a while, even if it's only once a year, they have forbidden grain. Paskins the Braisa, whenever you buy product from the Goyim, you have to treat it, guys, not like the mine. You treat it like Tevel Badai. Now, what does that mean? It means Chashin Lemeuta. And not only that, Chashin Lemeuta when it comes to tithing. And more than that, Stam Mishnah can be Rav Meir, not Stam Braisa. We're trying to show that in certain areas of halacha. Now, what's unique in this Braisa is that we know that there is an Isur here. We're not suspicious of. We know that one day a year there is an Isur. We don't know which day of the day. So you would say, you're kidding, a year has 354 days, Shnas Levana, Shnas Achama, 365, or, we have 4 options in the Jewish calendar. We have actually, 6 options, 3 in a simple year, 3 in a leap year. Doesn't matter. It's a very small minority, but Chashin Lemeuta, so therefore, I'll go that Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yechon and Aran arguing in the Metzias that Troy Eretz Yisrael is Nasuna Biyad Yisrael, but a lot of farmland are owned by Goyim, so therefore if you buy it from a Goyish merchant, so then it's a Tevel Vadai, the Mishnah has to be speaking about, you bought it from a Yid. The Gemara says, it can be. And it can be because don't compare this type of Miyuta with the Miyuta that we're talking about. And let me just say it up by heart, guys. When we're speaking about our Mishnah is you're buying a product, you're buying a type of fig or date, and they were of superior quality. At the times of the Mishnah and Gemara then, this only grew in Eretz Yisrael. You know it comes from Eretz Yisrael. You don't know who was the farmer. You don't know. Maybe somewhere down the chain, it went through the hand of a Yid. Then at least it's not going to be Tevel Vada. It will only be the Mai. Or if it stayed Biyad Goyim. You don't know that. So there is an unknown Isur. On top of that, we're saying that Roiv Eretz Yisrael, even the Rabbi Lazar, Nusuna Biyad Yisrael. So what would be Chashin Lemeuta? Chashin Lemeuta is that even when there is no, let's say, Eschazer Kesura, you don't know whether there's an Isur, but there is an Isur out there you have to be chayish to it. You can't compare that. That's a lot more of a stringent stand than the case of the Braisa of the Sirki. Guys, by the Sirki, you know that one day a year they buy Machalos Asuras. One day a year they buy Tevel Vada and they sell Tevel Vada. That's much worse. There, it makes more sense to be chayish to it. And the proof he brings, don't compare the case where you know there is an Isur to a case like ours, where you don't know whether this ever has in it an Isur. He brings a Gaval de Karaya. If we have to be chayish to such a ma'uta not only like in the Braisa, where you know Yom Echad, but even to where you don't know anything. You have no idea where this produce came from, other than it came from Israel. Now, that it come from a Jewish farmer, from a Goy, you don't know, but you have to be chayish ma'uta. Listen to this logic. Anytime a person comes to convert, now, are there people who come and you know from what country they came? Before Sanchedev was mevalbol the world, yeah. After Sanchedev made a bilbul in the world, we have no idea which person is coming from which original nationality, other than in the Jewish people, right? We follow the Yichus the whole time. So why would the halacha not be ein mekabel nois? You should never be allowed to accept any convert. Why, guys? We have a pasuk in Parshas Kiseitzei. You know, certain nations, God says they can convert, but for 3 generations they can't marry into Kahal Hashem. There are certain nations, Amoin, Umayav. It's a befedish pasuk. The Torah says Liyavai, Amoini, Umayavi, Kahal Hashem, etc., etc., etc. Ad oilam. So I have a simple question. I know Ammon and Moav are only 2 nations out of, let's say, the 70 nations. They are a small minority. But why wouldn't we say that Ani Oimer Ma'ammon and Moav, if Chayshin and Lema'uta, because out there are people from Ammon and Moav, why don't I always say Chayshin and Lema'uta, and the Nasa Oisa Hager Oichech L'chol Hager? If there would be someone from Ammon and Moav, he would not be allowed. We cannot accept him as a convert. So why don't we say we should never be allowed to accept any convert? We don't say that. And that doesn't mean that we are rejecting the Braisa of the Sirki. That's the key here in the Sugya. What that does mean is that even if you're Chayshin and Lemu'uta, that's only when you know there's a problem. You just don't know what day is the problem. Chayshin and Lemu'uta. But if you don't even know for sure that there's a problem, because the problem is not within, the problem is from out there in the world, the Leisa Kaman, the Isa Kaman, whichever type of words we're going to have in the Bavli, we don't compare that one case to the other. And therefore, we will reject that Rabbi Lazar will be chayish to such a type of me'uta, which is, you don't know you don't know for sure if this produce was grown biyad goy. Faket, you're saying, call the parish menuba parish. You want to be chayish me'uta, we're not chayish to such a me'uta. If not, Rabbi Lazar would never be allowed to accept a comment. And that cannot be the rationale behind it. No one, in other words, is chayshin to such a me'uta. Turning to that, you download them at base. So therefore, we have to go back to the original and now the only standing explanation. Right? The Gemara and Bavli would say that machaberta kidamrin and mikara, the machaberta and mikara b'lashon Yerushalmi is el on top of Yudal Dam base. Kani, what's true, what stands is that no, everyone follows the roiv. There was a machlokes who owned the majority of the farmlands in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael at their era. We're not only going to focus on the era of Rabbi Yochanan, and we would say at the end of the era of the Mishnah, the era of the Tanoim, going into the earlier times of the Amiroi. Ha, Rabbi Lazar Savar Meimar, repeating what we learned before, Roiv Eretz Yisrael Nosuna B'Yad Goyim. So yes, you follow the Roiv, and you have to presume that it was grown by a Goyish, a farmer, and we hold again that Ein Kinyan L'Goy Be'Eretz Yisrael L'Havkiya Midei Maisles. So the goy is not obligated to separate maises, but the produce inherently has to be tithed. And why would the farmer tithe it? He won't, he can't, he doesn't do that. It's ineffective even. And Rabbi Yochanan Savar Meimar, Roiv Eretz Yisrael, Nosuna B'Yad Yisrael. Explanation number 1 is the right explanation. Okay. Now says the Gemara, V'oidmen Hadam. Not only is it difficult to defend the type of chayshin and lemu'uta that we attempted to attribute Rabbi Lazar with, furthermore, I will prove to you that Rabbi Lazar is not concerned to this type of mute. How do we know that? Because Rab Ze'era, Shalach Sha'al, he sent a question, he sent a shaila to Rabbi Alexandria de Tzedoika. Guys, Tzedoika is a city in Eretz Yisrael. And what was his question? His question was Elaine, Nikel Vasa. Nikel Vasa is a certain type of date that is a very superior date, like we learned in the Mishnah, that only grew then in Eretz Yisrael. This Nikel Vasa that was not grown here. Okay, guys. So Doika was in Eretz Yisrael, but we knew that it was imported. This Nikel Vasa Dohachem Ma'atan Meshanan Bohoin. It definitely grew in Eretz Yisrael. And again, they also were following the shita that in Kinyan Legoy by Eretz Yisrael they have Kiyim Day Maisus, which means that even if the farmer was a goy, for sure it has to be tied. The question is, do we say that Roiv min Hagoyim, that the majority of the landowners who grow this type of Nikel Vasa, they are goyish farmers, which means that I, who bought it, I have to separate Maises because it's Vadai Tevel, Truma Gedoyla, Maiser Ishay, Maiser Shem, or do the majority, he asked them a question in Metzias again, Oy Ruben mi Yisrael, and therefore Yidden, the Roiv separated everything, it's only have to be treated as the Mai. So Amalei, so the response at Rabbi Ze'eda God is Leis Anan Yochlim Nishanan Bahoin, that we don't know. We don't know. We don't know what the Roiv is. It's hard to know what the Roiv is. And what does that imply? That had he known what the Roiv is, then he would have followed the Roiv. And we would not have said Chayshin Lemu'uta. Look inside the Rashirilio in the top left. Oirum Yisrael. If Umasran Demai Kid Rabbi Yechanan Ba'at Kan Lo Misapkalon El Be'i Beroiv Goyim Iberoiv Yisrael. We see from the way this question was asked and from the way the answer was answered that all of them, they only were concerned whether the majority of the farmers are Jews or Goyim, and no one took into account such a shita that even if the Roiv will be a Yidden, maybe Chashin Lemu'uta, there's no such a thing. Because you don't say Chashin Lemu'uta when we don't know whether there's a problem. And it's because it's like, as we explained, you can't compare that to the Braisi of the caravan of the Yishmael. Okay. Says the Gemara, as we have a machlokes, Amoyroyim, I know it's a machlokes and Metzias, you should know that this is already mirroring a machlokes Tanoim, because there's going to be a Tanya the Messiah to Rabbi Lazar, there's going to be a Tanya the Messiah with Rabbi Yechanan, and let's go learn them. Masnisa Messiah Ledain, Masnisa here's a Braison, O Masnisa Messiah Ledain, Masnisa Messiah Rabbi Lazar, who holds that Roiv Eretz Yisrael Nusuna Biyad Goyim. And here we're going to again add another layer which will make an exception of it, just a chazer to the rule we learned in the previous chapter. What did we learn in the previous chapter? That when you buy a product, produce, food, the chutz la'aretz, not the ones that the Mishnah began in this chapter, produce that they equally grow in Eretz Yisrael and the chutz la'aretz. So the general rule is you buy it in a market, you get to assume that it grew in the nearby area. You buy it b'chutz la'aretz, it doesn't have to be tithed at all. However, what happens if you buy it from a merchant, and that will see the unique din of a merchant. Hatagot, when you buy a product, we're speaking about a tagot, a merchant who we know gets his merchandise from everywhere, wherever it's cheaper. Locally, he imports it. So Hatagot, b'chol makom, no matter where you buy from a tagar, whether you buy it in Eretz Yisrael, and even if you buy it michutz la'aretz, you have to separate the mai. And let's go through this. Now, if you purchase it from a non-Jew, we're speaking about a tagar Jew, guys. If you purchase it from a non-Jew, if you purchase it from a non-Jew, I take that back. If you purchase it from a non-Jew who's not a merchant, David, you purchase it from a goy that's not a tagar, then what will be the din? The din is it's tevel vadai. The chiddush of a merchant is that since a merchant buys it from anyone. It could be he bought it from a Yid, yeah. Could be he bought it from a Jew. So therefore, you only have to separate the Mai, and that's Chiddush number one. Chiddush number two is, again, like we mentioned before, normally if you buy produce outside Eretz Yisrael, it's completely exempted. But if you buy it from a merchant, maybe he got it from Eretz Yisrael. Now, if he got it from Eretz Yisrael, maybe he got it from a Jew, maybe he got it from a Goy. All of these maybes bring you to the same halacha, that what? That you have to separate the Mai. Continues the Braisa, Emosai meaning, when is it only the Mai? This man Sheroiv Michnasai mi Yisrael. When we know that this merchant Beroiv buys from Jewish sellers. Avalim hoye lekeach min agoy. Here weiter, the Braisa says, Vadai. Now, guys, this is only obviously if the merchant himself is a goy. If the merchant will be a Jew, we will ask him. And if he says, I separated the maisres, or the original owner separated the maisres, it will be the mine. No, he'll be believed for Truma Gedolah. We're speaking about a merchant. You are buying it from a goy. Halachically, the goy has no namanos. We know he buys it from Jews and from goyim. He buys it from Eretz Yisrael and not Eretz Yisrael. Says the Braisa, it's the mine. On that, says the Braisa, hold on. Why the mine? We're going to go at kol the punish menuba punish. If we know that this merchant primarily buys it from Jews, that's when we can say the mine, because a Jew minimally will separate the main tithings. We only have to be chayish to the demai. If Beroiv is buying it from goyim, then we have to be chayshinon that it's tevel vadai, and that is exactly the way we now understand the Rabbi Lazar. We're not chayshinon lemota, but we follow the Roiv. Okay. Now it says the Gemara, Masnisa Masayim Rabbi Yechanan.
Rabbi,
I just want to say the final words down. In other words, what we see from this brisa is that if this merchant bought it, right? I just figured if the merchant bought it from goyim, then this brisa says what? Vadai. Hold on, why vadai? Even we don't know. Why don't we say that it came from the Roiv? Roiv farmland belongs to Jews. That's the Raya. That Roiv farmland belongs to goyim. Roiv Eretz Yisrael was Nasuna B'Yad Goyim at that era. If we know that he makes an effort to buy from Tagarim Yisraelim, then we follow that Roiv. If not, you understand?
Is the argument if it's the Mayor Tevel?
Yes, argument the Mayor Tevel only.
You can never not be the Mayor if it's if you buy.
Unless you bought it from a chaver. Unless we know independently you bought it from a chaver. Yeah, Danny.
with this understanding of the machlokes, when we're saying that it's b'metzias, so there's no real machlokes b'shita between the two opinions.
Mamish.
Meaning, if we came to an agreement on what the metzias was, then they both agree. Is that what we're saying?
That's called a machlokes and metzias. And since it's difficult to have a machlokes and metzias, the Gemara wants to show you that this was already a doubt that they had in the era before Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yechanan. Braisa was compiled at the time of the Mishnah. I mean, we're talking about, year 150 to the Goyish calendar, to year 250. That's the era we're talking, the end of the era of the.
But just in terms of understanding it, like let's say when we think of Eretz Yisrael today, where it's Rav Yidden, so then you would say everyone agrees that whatever. I mean, I'm just it's
today. I think we only rely on chazakes and on roids when we cannot clarify the metzias. Whenever you can clarify the metzias, I think because of technology today, I think you can know exactly what farm it came from. I'm not sure. I'm saying you can know. Yet one thing is for sure. Today you can make. If you have to know how to go on the internet, you can find out. You have to first know the portions of Eretz Yisrael that were conquered b'dei Oil Bavel, Danny, because that for sure includes Yehuda and Shomron. And I don't know who owns the majority of the farm. I don't know, Danny, the Metzias. What the Medinat Yisrael considers Israel is completely irrelevant to this. Eretz Yisrael is much bigger. Now, who owns the lands there? The Bedouin? I don't know. But I know today you can find out. You can find out when you're buying the market.
Where does the produce come from? Meaning
the produce come.
they know where most of the produce is coming from.
That's why today, whatever you can find out independently will be the beginning of everything. You only use chazakes and roivs and all this when you don't know. Then they have no idea. Then it sounds like the Braisa holds that unless you don't, if this merchant, if we don't know independently that this merchant buys it from Jewish sellers, then the presumption is that if it's biyad goyim, then it's vadai. Now hold on, why vadai? Even if he buys it from goyim, but why don't we go after the roif? Is a haraya that this Braisa holds that the majority of the lands at that era was farmed by goyim, owned and farmed by goyim. So unless you know otherwise, you have to presume. And if it came, the farmer was a goy and the merchant is a goy, of course tevel vadai. They cannot separate mices.
But if today we can say that the majority is Jewish farmland.
Yeah, that's what Danny is pointing out. Yeah. Then even if you would have a doubt, I want to add another layer to that. And that is, again, and I'm going way theoretical. When Yechon and Gadol made his takana, he made his takana only for the Mai. He says that even then, Truma Gedoyla, everyone's separated. I'm saying this not to be a criticizing voice, maybe because of all these years of Galus and Tinuk Shanishba. I don't know if the farmers now that are not observant, if they at least take off Truma Gedoyla. Could be that the farmers today don't take off anything. I know that. I just want to be so critical. That also might now. Will that?
No, but in Eretz Yisrael, fruits and vegetables, they all have a tudah.
No, they have a tudah for you, Danny. That means I'm talking about without a with a tudah. It's vadai good.
No,
that means that
there's a reason why even a non-Jewish not from farmer would separate maestros, because he wants us to be able to sell it in the shuk.
Danny, if he doesn't have a tudah,
most of the tudahs is a star.
If he doesn't have a tudah, I'm just curious, what would be the status? That's a good question. I don't know if the status would be Damai. Could be the status would be Tabal Vada. When you go into a store that sells meat that doesn't have a hashgacha, we don't say it's not glad. We say it's a chazer gomer. If a person is not kosher, then they're going to do tshuva. They don't understand what they're doing, but they're selling the vadai not good. Let's just finish one more line over here, and we'll go into that Tezvav, and then we'll stop. So, and now the Gemara says, hold on, and so that's now Masnisa Masai Rabbi Yechanan. What's the other brayso? Tani, we learned in a brayso. Rab Nechemya Oimer. Again, we're speaking about this new layer that we introduced today. We learned the basis is if you buy something out of Israel from a store, you assume it grew nearby. Exempt completely. And now we're learning what? But if you buy it from a merchant are people, they buy from wherever. They buy local, they buy imported. Then there is no such an assumption. So Rab Nechemya says that if you buy it from a merchant, no matter from whom the merchant is telling you he bought it from, whether the merchant is telling you that he got it from a goy, whether he's telling you he bought it from a yid, and we're speaking about a yid, he's saying it was a Jew, that's a chaver. Whether he's telling you he bought it from a kuti, whether he bought it from an Amma Aretz. What do we know independently? Okay? Kuti were a group of people that at the times of the Tanoim, there was a doubt whether they have a status of a Jew or a goy. And if they would have a status of a goy, then it would be Tevel Gomel. If they would have a status of a Jew, then it would have a din of the Mai. Okay? They were not Chavedim. So here, the point here is, it doesn't matter what he is saying. If we know that he is like most other merchants, guys, they're not loyal. It doesn't work that way. They're loyal to the dollar. Well, they buy it wherever it's cheaper. Because as long as we know, this is a normal merchant, which means he buys it from whoever has the best price for him. So therefore, Pamachas min agoy, Pamachas mi Yisrael. So the din will be, now that's the huge chiddush that the Braisa says it's going to have a din of the Mai. Now that has to be explained. Look inside the Pnei Moshe, the way he touches it. The last one on the Amid. Echad akum, echad misrael, echad kudam. Im hu pa'amim, sholikech mana akum, pa'amim Yisrael. So the din is, no matter what you buy from him, is the mai. Now I have a problem with that. What's the problem with that? Guys, we don't have the manus for someone to be lenient. But we should have the manus when someone is saying something to be machnet. There is the manus. This guy's a merchant. If he bought it from a Yid, I understand why it's Damai. Even though we don't know who the Jew is, even if he's an Amaretz, Epis, he's separated. He took off from a Gedoyim. If he bought it from a Goy, if the farmer was a Goy, and the and whoever sold it to him was a Goy, then it's Vadai. Then it's Vadai Tevel. So why would we not believe him? L'chumra asks the Gemara, Rab Chia Bar Ada asked in front of Rav Mana, to Rav Mana, 1 second. Why don't Neymar? Why wouldn't the Braisa paskin that if he says he bought it from a Yid, the Mai? If he says he bought it from a Goy, then it should be Vadai Tevel. And don't tell me we don't have the manas. We don't have the manas for him to be lenient. We're not going to trust a Goy if he's saying something that will bring a kula. The question, like you were saying, the question is not completely exempt or chayiv. The Mai or Tevel Vadai. Why does the Braisa say, as long as he's a normal merchant and buys it from wherever it's the most profit, why don't we still ask him? And the answer is, Tiftar, that since the target is a Goy, Tiftar, show you a target Goy. And what taka happens? Who do you think a merchant buys stuff from? From a variety of suppliers. Who would pay attention to remember, this I bought from the Jew, this I bought from the Goy? Only someone that cares about kashrus. If you don't care about kashrus, you're buying apples, you're buying oranges, you're buying grain. You're not tracking who came from where. We don't. Why he wouldn't know. So what do? We follow the roiv. That's the kicker. If the roiv would have been goyim, the Braisa never would have said the mai. Let's read it inside. V'Yisrael v'goyim b'kaylim lefanav. The way exactly it works today. You have all of these farmers, and they're going to the merchants, right? You went to a wholesale market. So he's going, there's all types of people. He's buying all types of products. He's getting the best price for the best quality, whatever it is. Since he doesn't he's a guy, he doesn't have the manos to say, I remember this came from this one, this came from that one. No one remembers unless it's Negeya. And therefore it's nine. Hold on. If Roy, the words are, if Roy Eretz Yisrael, the Sunnah B'Yad Goyim, if that would have been the case, then it still doesn't make sense. Then follow the majority, call the parish menuba parish, and the din should have been Tavel Vadai. The fact that it's only the Mai, you see in this Braisa, the presumption is B'Yad Yisrael. Previous Braisa, the presumption is B'Yad Goyim. So we see there is a machlek, because it was probably very 50-50-ish. It was very close, like the Metzias of who owned the land in that era. And you see, so there was a machlek, as Tanoim, early Amoraim, and subsequently that will be the Nafkamina, whether it's going to be Damai or whether it's going to be Tevel Vadai. To be continued.
Were most of the Jews from?
Most of the Jews were from enough that they separated from